What if one of the smallest and most forgotten states in America was secretly responsible for some of the weirdest stories in U.S. history? A place where a man once rode 80 miles through a thunderstorm to save the Declaration of Independence, where most of America's biggest corporations legally live inside a few office buildings, and where people launch pumpkins out of giant machines just for fun. Sounds made up, right? But every single one of these stories comes from Delaware. Today we're diving into 71 of the dumbest, weirdest, and most unbelievable facts from Delaware that even locals can't explain. 1. What if American independence came down to one exhausted man fighting a thunderstorm on horseback? Caesar Rodney was sick, wheezing with asthma, yet he rode 80 miles through pounding rain and muddy roads to reach Philadelphia before a crucial vote. Delaware's delegation was split, and without him, the Declaration of Independence might have stalled. And he arrived drenched and barely standing, then cast the deciding vote that made the decision unanimous. While other founders debated in dry rooms, Rodney battled lightning and time itself. Delaware did not just join the revolution, it dramatically galloped into it at the last possible second. 2. How does a state smaller than many cities quietly become the legal home of corporate America? Delaware, with fewer than 1 million residents, is where more than half of all Fortune 500 companies choose to incorporate. These giants often have no factories, no headquarters, not even a break room in the state. Yet legally, they call it home. Lawmakers built ultra-friendly corporate rules that turned paperwork into profit. It is like the ultimate business loophole playground where trillion-dollar companies rent a mailing address and gain powerful legal protections, while most Americans never realize Delaware is running the boardroom game. 3. What if a state decided geometry was more important than straight lines and drew its border with a literal compass? Delaware is the only state in America with a perfectly circular boundary known as the 12-mile circle around New Castle. In colonial times, surveyors anchored one end of a compass at a courthouse and simply swung it outward to create an arc that still defines the map today. No other state has a border that looks like it was sketched during math class. Our Delaware basically told the rest of America that squares are boring and circles are forever. 4. How did a tiny state win the ultimate speed round in American history? Delaware became the first state to ratify the U.S. Constitution in 1787, and it took only 5 days of debate. While larger states argued endlessly about power and representation, Delaware delegates quickly said yes and locked in their place at the front of the line. Or that is why every license plate proudly says "the first state," as if it were a permanent gold medal. Other states hesitated for months, but Delaware treated the Constitution like a limited-time offer and signed before anyone else could overthink it. 5. Why does Delaware proudly celebrate a chicken that sounds ready for a boxing match? The blue hen chicken became the state bird because Revolutionary War soldiers from Delaware carried fighting roosters with them to boost morale. But these birds were so fierce that the soldiers themselves were nicknamed Blue Hens Chickens by the British. Instead of being offended, they embraced it and turned a barnyard insult into permanent state pride. Most states picked elegant birds like cardinals or eagles, but Delaware chose a scrappy farm fighter that perfectly matched its stubborn revolutionary attitude and never backed down. 6. What if medieval punishment refused to retire and just quietly stayed on the books? In Delaware kept public whipping posts as legal criminal punishment longer than almost any other state in America. The last public whipping happened in 1952, which sounds less like colonial history and more like something your grandparents remember. While the rest of the country modernized its justice system, Delaware still had a wooden post standing as a reminder of older times. The law was not fully abolished until 1972. And imagine explaining to someone that corporal punishment was still official policy during the age of television and rock and roll. 7. How does the man who saved choking victims everywhere start his life in America's smallest powerhouse state? Henry Heimlich, inventor of the Heimlich maneuver, was born in Wilmington, Delaware. The simple abdominal thrust he developed has saved hundreds of thousands of lives across the globe. Yet many people performing it in restaurants have no idea they are using a technique created by someone from a state most forget to name. Delaware quietly produced a medical breakthrough that turned everyday citizens into lifesavers. From birthday dinners to crowded ball games, a Delaware-born idea keeps people breathing. 8. What happens when a backyard bet involving pumpkins spirals completely out of control? Or in 1986, a group of friends in Delaware argued about how far they could launch a pumpkin, and instead of letting it go, they invented pumpkin chunkin. Teams began building giant air cannons, trebuchets, and mechanical contraptions that hurl pumpkins across fields at absurd distances. It grew into a world championship event attracting engineers, thrill seekers, and spectators who treat flying produce like a national sport. Only Delaware could turn leftover Halloween decorations into a competitive engineering obsession. 9. How can a creature older than dinosaurs throw a beach party every spring? Horseshoe crabs, unchanged for about 450 million years, gather by the thousands along Delaware Bay to spawn. These armored fossils crawl ashore in massive numbers, creating one of the most ancient wildlife spectacles in North America. Their eggs attract migratory birds that time entire journeys around this event. While tourists search for boardwalk fries, prehistoric creatures are reenacting a survival ritual older than trees. Delaware's coastline becomes a living time machine where evolution refuses to update its design. 10. How does a state make over $1 billion a year from companies that barely set foot inside it? Delaware earns enormous revenue from corporate franchise taxes paid by businesses legally incorporated there. Many of these corporations have no offices, factories, or employees in the state, yet their registration fees help fund a large portion of Delaware's government. It is like running a toll booth for paperwork instead of cars. Other states rely on heavy industry or tourism, but Delaware discovered that legal fine print can be more profitable than oil fields or theme parks. 11. What if your state's highest mountain would barely count as a driveway incline in Colorado? Delaware's highest natural point reaches only 448 feet above sea level, meaning a height many Americans could casually hike without realizing they summited the entire state. There are office buildings taller than Delaware's peak. While western states brag about 14,000-foot giants, Delaware quietly claims a hill that feels more like an enthusiastic bump. Yet that modest elevation still earns official recognition and a marker. In Delaware, conquering the highest point might require less oxygen and more imagination than anywhere else in America. 12. How can billion-dollar corporate battles be decided without a single juror in the room? Delaware's Court of Chancery operates without juries, relying instead on a single judge who specializes in corporate law. That unusual structure is exactly why global companies choose Delaware to settle massive disputes. Executives prefer predictable legal expertise over emotional courtroom drama. So while television shows feature shouting attorneys and 12 angry citizens, in Delaware quietly resolves boardroom wars with calm, technical rulings. The fate of billion-dollar mergers can rest on one judge's interpretation, turning legal precision into the state's most powerful export. 13. How did a northern state vote against abolishing slavery after the Civil War had already been fought? In 1865, Delaware initially rejected the 13th Amendment, meaning it voted against officially ending slavery. Even though the Confederacy had collapsed, Delaware's legislature refused to ratify the amendment at the time. Slavery only became illegal there because the federal government adopted it nationally. It would take decades before Delaware symbolically approved what the country had already enforced. The first state that rushed to ratify the Constitution somehow dragged its feet when it came to permanently ending slavery. 14. What if the iconic American log cabin was not born on the frontier, but planted by Scandinavians in a tiny colony? In 1638, Swedish settlers built the first log cabins in America along the Delaware River. Popular mythology often credits English pioneers pushing westward, but the design actually arrived with New Sweden colonists who understood harsh winters. Their interlocking timber construction proved practical and durable, spreading across the continent over time. So the classic symbol of rugged American self-reliance traces back to a small European settlement in Delaware, not the Wild West or Plymouth Rock. 15. How does a state proudly brand itself? The first state, yet consistently get forgotten in geography quizzes. Delaware prints the first state on license plates, road signs, and tourism brochures as a permanent reminder of its early Constitution ratification. Yet surveys repeatedly show many Americans struggle to remember Delaware when naming all 50 states. It is as if the state shouts its achievement while the rest of the country politely nods and then forgets. Delaware may have crossed the starting line first, but in the popularity contest of state trivia, it often finishes quietly off the radar. 16. What if one of the oldest courts in the Western Hemisphere has been quietly operating since before the United States existed? Delaware's Court of Chancery was founded in the 1700s, predating the nation itself. While empires rose and fell, this equity court continued refining corporate and business law. Its uninterrupted history gives it enormous credibility in financial circles worldwide. Few Americans realize that one of the most influential legal institutions on Earth sits inside a small mid-Atlantic state. Delaware did not just inherit legal tradition, it preserved a centuries-old system almost intact. 17. What everyday object in your closet was born from a chemistry experiment in Delaware? In 1935, DuPont chemists working in Wilmington invented nylon, a synthetic fiber that revolutionized manufacturing. Stockings, parachutes, toothbrush bristles, ropes, and countless modern products suddenly had a stronger and cheaper alternative to silk. During World War II, nylon even replaced silk in the military gear. A laboratory breakthrough in Delaware reshaped global textiles and consumer culture. The next time someone ties a shoelace or zips a jacket, they are unknowingly benefiting from a scientific gamble that paid off inside a Delaware lab. 18. What if ordering fries without ketchup was not a suggestion but a sacred tradition? At Rehoboth Beach, Thrasher's French Fries serves its famous fries with apple cider vinegar and firmly rejects ketchup. Locals defend this rule like constitutional law, insisting vinegar is the only acceptable topping. Tourists who ask for ketchup are gently corrected as if they missed a cultural orientation session. The beachside stand has maintained this stubborn policy for generations. In a country obsessed with customization, Delaware manages to enforce a fry doctrine that says, take it or leave it. 19. What if forests started turning into ghostly skeletons right before your eyes? Along Delaware's coast, rising saltwater intrusion has created an expanding ghost forest where living trees die and remain as gray, lifeless trunks. From highways, drivers can see entire sections of woodland transformed into eerie landscapes. Climate change and sea level rise are actively reshaping the state's geography. Delaware's low elevation makes it especially vulnerable to these shifts. It is not a scene from a horror film, but a real environmental transformation unfolding in slow motion along the shoreline. To 20. How did modern credit cards explode into popularity because of one legal change in a small state? In 1981, Delaware eliminated interest rate caps on credit cards, inviting major banks to relocate their credit operations there. Institutions like Chase and Citibank quickly moved in, transforming Delaware into a financial hub. That decision helped shape today's credit card industry, including the widespread use of higher variable interest rates. A quiet legislative adjustment in Dover ended up influencing how millions of Americans borrow and repay money every single day. 21. What if an entire sovereign state could fit inside Los Angeles County and still leave room for extra parking? Delaware's total land area is so small that it fits comfortably within Los Angeles County, with more than 500 square miles to spare. Yet despite its compact size, it still sends two U.S. senators to Washington and carries the same constitutional weight as Texas or California. Geography may rank it tiny, but federal power does not measure square miles. Delaware proves that in American politics, even the smallest physical footprint can carry equal legislative muscle. 22. How does a state quietly become the preferred emergency room for collapsing corporate giants? When companies like Enron, Lehman Brothers, Toys R Us, and Kodak faced bankruptcy, they filed in Delaware's courts. The state handles an enormous share of major corporate restructurings because of its specialized legal expertise. While headlines focus on Wall Street panic, Delaware judges methodically sort through financial wreckage. It is as if billion-dollar companies check into Delaware when their balance sheets flatline. The most dramatic corporate downfalls in America often pass through courtrooms tucked inside this small mid-Atlantic state. 23. What if you could count every county in a state on one hand and still have two fingers left? Delaware has only 3 counties, the fewest of any state in the country. Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex divide the entire state, and one of them holds more than half the population. While states like Texas manage hundreds of counties, Delaware keeps its map refreshingly simple. Political campaigns, school districts, and local rivalries all play out across just 3 administrative regions. It is streamlined governance on a scale that feels almost minimalist compared to the rest of America. 24. What if an American fort was named after an 11-year-old girl who had just become queen? In 1638, Swedish colonists built Fort Christina in present-day Wilmington and named it after Queen Christina of Sweden. She was a child monarch when the settlement was established, yet her name marked the beginning of a European foothold in the region. The colony of New Sweden lasted only 17 years before Dutch forces seized it. Still, Delaware's early identity carries the legacy of a young Scandinavian ruler whose childhood title crossed the Atlantic. 25. How did elementary school students decide an official symbol for an entire state? Delaware's state bug is the ladybug, and it was chosen not by scientists or legislators, but by a vote of school children. Lawmakers honored the results, in turning a classroom exercise into permanent state law. While other states debate serious policy matters, Delaware once trusted its youngest residents to select an insect representative. The cheerful red beetle now carries official status because children argued its case. It is democracy at its most wholesome and perhaps most unexpectedly influential. 26. What if modern corporate disputes were still governed by legal traditions rooted in 17th century England? A Delaware law preserves an equity system that traces directly back to English chancery courts from the 1600s. This structure separates certain business matters from standard jury trials and emphasizes judicial expertise. No other state maintained this framework as consistently. Global corporations now rely on doctrines shaped centuries ago across the Atlantic. Delaware essentially modernized medieval legal philosophy and turned it into a 21st century advantage, proving that sometimes the oldest rulebook becomes the most profitable. 27. What if one of rock music's most recognizable guitar riffs came from a kid growing up in Wilmington? George Thorogood, known for the anthem "Bad to the Bone," was raised in Delaware before becoming a blues rock icon. His gritty style and rebellious energy contrast sharply with the state's quiet corporate image. Yet Delaware produced the musician whose song now blasts at sporting events and biker rallies nationwide. Behind the calm suburban streets was a future rocker shaping a soundtrack for American swagger. Even the first state can generate seriously loud attitude. 28. How did a breakfast meat made from pork scraps become a proud regional delicacy? Scrapple, a loaf combining leftover pork parts with cornmeal and spices, is a Delaware staple that outsiders often approach with suspicion. Locals slice and fry it until crisp, serving it alongside eggs as if it were gourmet cuisine. While many Americans hesitate at the ingredient list, Delaware treats scrapple like culinary heritage. The dish reflects resourcefulness from earlier agricultural days. It may look mysterious on the plate, but in Delaware kitchens it represents comfort food with unapologetic pride. 29. What if over 1 million birds scheduled their migration around one small stretch of shoreline? Each spring, the Delaware Bay becomes a crucial stopover for massive numbers of migratory shorebirds. They arrive to feast almost entirely on horseshoe crab eggs, fueling journeys that span continents. This convergence creates one of the largest concentrations of shorebirds in the Western Hemisphere. Birdwatchers travel from across the country to witness the spectacle. For a few weeks every year, Delaware becomes a global wildlife crossroads where ancient marine life and long-distance avian travelers intersect in perfect timing. 30. What if shopping required zero mental math at the checkout counter? Delaware has no state sales tax, meaning the price on the tag is exactly what customers pay. That simple policy attracts cross-border shoppers who drive from neighboring states specifically to avoid extra charges. Retail centers near state lines thrive because of this advantage. While most Americans brace for added percentages at the register, Delaware keeps transactions refreshingly straightforward. In a nation where tax calculations often complicate purchases, Delaware offers the rare pleasure of paying precisely what was advertised. 31. For more than 80 years, two tiny colonies argued over a line on a map as if it were a matter of national survival. Delaware's border dispute with Maryland dragged on through surveys, negotiations, and repeated disagreements before it was finally settled. The eventual boundary became part of the famous Mason-Dixon surveying effort, but only after decades of frustration. Imagine fighting longer over property lines than many actual wars last. This was not a clash of empires, but a stubborn tug-of-war between neighbors who refused to agree where one backyard ended and the other began. 32. At one ordinary office building in Wilmington, more than 285,000 companies are legally registered to a single address. The structure does not resemble a futuristic corporate tower filled with executives. It looks like a normal building quietly holding the paperwork of global business giants. Many of these corporations have never sent an employee there, yet that address serves as their official home. Or it is less a headquarters and more a legal illusion powered by filing cabinets and digital records. Delaware turned one location into perhaps the busiest corporate mailbox in America. 33. Delaware's state legislature does not even operate full-time, yet it writes laws that shape massive segments of the American economy. Lawmakers hold regular day jobs and meet only part of the year, but their decisions influence corporations worth billions. While Congress debates non-stop in Washington, Delaware's part-time legislators quietly manage a legal framework relied upon worldwide. The contrast feels almost absurd. A small group working seasonal sessions governs rules that impact boardrooms across the globe. In Delaware, part-time politics produces full-time consequences for corporate America. 34. During the 1800s, Delaware dominated the peach industry so completely it was known as America's peach capital. Train cars loaded with fruit rolled north to major cities, and orchards covered vast stretches of farmland. Then a bacterial blight swept through and devastated the crop with stunning speed. Within a short period, the booming industry collapsed almost overnight. Farmers who built livelihoods around peaches watched orchards fail across the state. Delaware went from agricultural powerhouse to cautionary tale, proving that even the sweetest success can vanish when nature shifts the rules. 35. For over a century, the DuPont family's influence in Delaware was so extensive that historians describe the state as resembling a corporate feudal system. The family's company shaped the economy, controlled vast land holdings, and carried enormous political weight. Generations of DuPont leadership intertwined business power with public life. Decisions made in corporate offices often echoed through government corridors. Few American states have experienced such concentrated private influence for so long. Delaware's modern identity cannot be understood without recognizing how deeply one industrial dynasty molded its development and reputation. 36. Long after neighboring states modernized their criminal codes, Delaware held onto corporal punishment traditions rooted in colonial law. Legal remnants of physical penalties lingered decades beyond when most Americans assumed such practices had disappeared. Reform eventually came, but only after the state gained a reputation for being slow to abandon its older disciplinary framework. The timeline places Delaware behind much of the continental Northeast in updating its statutes. It is a reminder that legal systems do not always evolve at the same pace, even within regions that appear culturally aligned. 37. Ryan Phillip, later known for major Hollywood roles, grew up in Newcastle, Delaware, far from red carpets and film premieres. Before starring in movies that defined late 1990s pop culture, he was just another local kid in a small state rarely associated with entertainment fame. His career placed Delaware on an unexpected celebrity map. While audiences watched him in dramatic thrillers and period films, few realized his roots trace back to quiet neighborhoods along the Delaware River. Even understated states occasionally export recognizable faces to global screens. 38. Each year, the town of Camden hosts a full peach festival complete with music, food, and competitions celebrating a crop that Delaware no longer meaningfully grows at commercial scale. The event honors a past era when orchards defined the agricultural landscape. Visitors bite into peach desserts while learning about an industry that largely vanished generations ago. It feels like a reunion with history rather than a showcase of current production. And Delaware keeps the memory alive through celebration, proving that cultural identity can outlast the economic reality that first created it. 39. Delaware sits at an average elevation of only about 60 feet above sea level, the lowest average of any state in the country. That modest height means storm surges, and rising seas pose outsized risks to communities and infrastructure. Large portions of land lie barely above high tide levels. In practical terms, the state's geography makes it unusually vulnerable to coastal change. While mountain states measure risk in snowfall totals, Delaware measures it in inches of water. Its physical profile leaves little margin between dry land and encroaching tides. 40. Entire outlet mall economies near Delaware's borders exist largely because shoppers cross state lines to avoid sales tax. Drivers from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey regularly make the trip knowing the posted price is the final price. Retail developments strategically cluster close to highways that feed this flow of bargain hunters. The phenomenon turns tax policy into regional attraction. Delaware did not build theme parks to draw visitors. It simply removed a percentage at the register and watched neighboring wallets migrate toward its shopping centers year after year. 41. But Delaware's entire Atlantic coastline stretches only about 28 miles, yet those few miles explode with summer tourists every year. Beach towns like Rehoboth and Bethany transform from quiet communities into packed boardwalk scenes filled with umbrellas, arcades, and funnel cake lines. Compared to sprawling coastal states, Delaware's ocean access looks almost modest on a map. Still, those narrow strips of sand generate massive seasonal traffic and economic activity. Cite a state with one of the shortest shorelines in America somehow squeezes maximum vacation energy out of every single mile. 42. Some of the world's most powerful technology companies, including Tesla, Google, Apple, and Amazon, maintain legal entities incorporated in Delaware. These corporations operate globally, lobby aggressively, and shape modern life. Yet many rely on Delaware's corporate framework for legal structure. The irony is difficult to miss. Companies that debate regulation in other states quietly benefit from Delaware's predictable business laws. The arrangement highlights how influential one small jurisdiction can be in the architecture of global capitalism. Delaware's legal code underpins brands that dominate the digital age. 43. Joe Biden represented Delaware in the United States Senate for 36 consecutive years before becoming president. His tenure in Washington lasted longer than the entire lifespan of the original United States under the Articles of Confederation. For decades, he carried the interests of one of America's smallest states into national debates on foreign policy, crime, and economic reform. Delaware's modest population still maintained a steady presence through his long career. Few states can claim such extended continuity in federal representation from a single political figure. 44. But during the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army unit from Delaware earned a reputation so fierce that British troops mockingly called them Blue Hen's Chickens. Instead of rejecting the nickname, the soldiers embraced it as a badge of pride. Their discipline and combat effectiveness made the small state's regiment stand out in major battles. Over time, the once sarcastic label transformed into an enduring symbol of Delaware identity. A battlefield taunt evolved into the official state bird and mascot, proving that reputation can turn ridicule into lasting honor. 45. Delaware's official state song titled Our Delaware was written in 1925, yet surveys consistently suggest that most residents could not hum a single line. The anthem exists in statute and ceremony, occasionally performed at formal events, but rarely enters everyday life. While other states broadcast their songs at sporting events or schools, Delaware's tune remains largely unfamiliar even to locals. It stands as a symbolic tradition more recognized on paper than in practice. The first state may have formal pride, but its musical signature often goes unheard. 46. In the 19th century, Delaware enforced a law requiring newly freed black residents to post a financial bond, guaranteeing good behavior. The policy effectively placed a price tag on freedom and made economic independence far more difficult. Those unable to pay risked severe consequences under a system designed to maintain control even after slavery ended. The statute reveals how legal mechanisms extended inequality beyond the Civil War. Delaware's history includes not only early constitutional pride, but also policies that complicated the promise of liberty for many of its residents. 47. In 1802, A.I. DuPont established his first gunpowder mill along the Brandywine Creek, laying the foundation for a company that would later produce Kevlar, Teflon, and Lycra. The enterprise began with explosives and expanded into materials that shape modern clothing, cookware, and protective gear. From battlefield powder to non-stick pans, the technological arc is remarkable. Delaware became the birthplace of innovations woven into daily life worldwide. One industrial decision beside a creek helped transform chemistry into products used by millions across generations. E48. Dogfish Head Brewery in Milton once brewed a beer using actual space meteorite dust as an ingredient. The experimental batch blended astronomy with craft brewing in a way few drinkers expected. Delaware's growing reputation for creative beer suddenly included material older than Earth itself. What started as a coastal brewery evolved into a brand known for boundary-pushing recipes. While some states compete over traditional lagers, Delaware added cosmic minerals to the mix. The result was less about ordinary refreshment and more about turning science into a conversation starter. 49. By the mid-20th century, the Delaware River had become so polluted that oxygen levels dropped to zero in certain sections. Fish populations collapsed, and industrial waste dominated the waterway. The environmental crisis eventually sparked one of America's earliest large-scale river restoration efforts. Like cleanup initiatives gradually improved water quality and revived aquatic life. The transformation from ecological disaster to recovery story reflects both the cost of industrial growth and the impact of sustained regulation. Delaware's major river stands as evidence that environmental decline can be reversed with determined action. 50. Delaware's franchise tax system generates so much revenue from corporate registrations that it funds a significant portion of the entire state government. As companies incorporated there pay annual fees regardless of whether they conduct business locally. That steady stream of paperwork-based income reduces reliance on other forms of taxation. In practical terms, the state budget depends heavily on corporations that may never open a physical office within its borders. Delaware effectively monetized legal domicile and built a fiscal model powered by signatures, filings, and compliance forms rather than factories. 51. Extend in certain northern parts of Delaware, and within a short drive you can reach 3 different states in under 10 miles. The geography is so compact that Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey cluster tightly around its borders. Commuters regularly cross state lines without even considering it unusual. In larger states, a 10-mile trip barely moves you across town, but in Delaware it can shift you into a new jurisdiction entirely. The map compresses regional identity into a tight corridor where accents, laws, and tax rules change faster than the scenery outside the car window. 52. When the Delaware Supreme Court issues a ruling on a major corporate dispute, boardrooms across America pay attention. The state's legal precedents heavily influence how companies nationwide structure mergers, shareholder rights, and executive responsibilities. Attorneys often treat Delaware decisions as a blueprint for corporate governance far beyond its borders. Few other state courts carry comparable weight in business law. A single opinion released in Dover can ripple through financial markets and compliance departments from New York to California, demonstrating how concentrated legal authority shapes national corporate behavior. 53. Delaware has cast electoral votes in every presidential election since 1789. Yet with only 3 votes, it has never become the decisive battleground in modern campaigns. Candidates rarely build entire strategies around winning the state. Its participation has been consistent but seldom dramatic. While larger swing states dominate headlines, Delaware quietly fulfills its constitutional role every 4 years. The steady record highlights continuity rather than spectacle. In the theater of presidential politics, Delaware performs reliably in every act, but almost never steals the spotlight. 54. New Sweden, established along the Delaware River in 1638, became the only lasting Scandinavian colony in North America before Dutch forces absorbed it 17 years later. Swedish and Finnish settlers introduced log cabin construction and left cultural traces that outlived their brief political control. The colony's short existence rarely appears in mainstream American history lessons, and yet it marked a unique chapter in European competition for territory. Delaware once hosted a Nordic experiment in colonization that quietly shaped architectural traditions across the continent long after its flag disappeared. 55. Wilmington carries the nickname corporate capital of the world among legal and financial professionals, though many Americans outside those industries have never heard the phrase. While the title reflects the city's concentration of incorporated entities and financial services infrastructure. Skyscrapers in its modest skyline house, firms that manage transactions worth billions. Compared to New York or Chicago, the city appears understated, yet its legal footprint extends globally. Delaware's largest city operates as a quiet nerve center for paperwork that underpins much of modern commerce. 56. For a period after the Civil War, Delaware maintained a law preventing freed black residents from owning dogs. The restriction served no public safety purpose and functioned primarily as a mechanism of racial control. Policies like this reveal how legal discrimination extended beyond emancipation through targeted everyday prohibitions. Even seemingly small regulations carried significant symbolic and practical consequences. Delaware's statutory history includes measures that reflected broader national struggles over civil rights and equality long after slavery formally ended. 57. Margaret Chase became Delaware's first female state senator in 1970, nearly 183 years after the state ratified the Constitution. For most of its existence, the legislative chamber remained exclusively male. For her election marked a significant shift in representation within one of America's oldest state governments. The timeline underscores how long structural barriers persisted, even in states that pride themselves on early constitutional leadership. Political inclusion in Delaware evolved gradually, mirroring broader national changes in gender equality across public office. 58. Slaughter Beach sounds like the setting of a horror film. Yet the Delaware town takes its name from a local family called Slaughter, rather than any violent event. The unsettling label still surprises first-time visitors who expect dark history instead of quiet shoreline scenery. Despite the dramatic name, the community is known for wildlife observation and calm coastal views. Delaware manages to host one of the most ominously named towns in America, without any actual massacre attached to it, leaving newcomers both relieved and slightly amused. 59. Sections of Delaware's barrier islands have vanished within a single decade due to erosion and rising seas. Shorelines that once supported homes and vegetation gradually slipped away as tides reshaped the coast. Engineers and environmental planners now monitor these changes in real time. The state's low elevation amplifies the impact of even modest sea level increases. Maps require periodic revision as nature redraws boundaries. Delaware's physical footprint is not static but evolving, demonstrating how coastal geography can transform faster than many communities expect. 60. Wilmington's financial district employs more banking and credit industry workers per capita than nearly any other American city. In a municipality of roughly 70,000 residents, massive credit operations process transactions affecting millions nationwide. Saw office towers, house analysts, and compliance teams managing complex financial products. The scale of activity contrasts sharply with the city's modest population. Delaware's largest urban center quietly supports a trillion-dollar infrastructure of lending and payments. Behind an unassuming skyline operates one of the country's most concentrated hubs of consumer finance expertise. 61. At its narrowest point, Delaware is slimmer than the length of Manhattan Island, meaning you could practically lay New York's most famous borough across the state and watch it spill over both sides. The compressed width makes cross-state travel astonishingly quick. In some stretches, a short drive takes you from one border to another before a podcast episode even finishes. Geography that tight shapes commuting, commerce, and identity. Delaware's dimensions constantly remind residents that they live inside one of the most compact political units in the entire United States, R62. In 1899, Delaware deliberately rewrote its incorporation laws to be more flexible than New Jersey's, which at the time dominated corporate registrations. By offering looser requirements and clearer protections for management, Delaware effectively poached the corporate haven model and made it permanent. Businesses migrated rapidly, bringing filing fees and long-term revenue. The strategy was not accidental, but carefully engineered economic policy. A small state studied a competitor, adjusted the rulebook, and captured a national market in corporate charters through legislative precision rather than industrial expansion. 63. Delaware's governor can serve 2 consecutive terms, sit out 1 term, and then run again with no lifetime limit. This unusual structure creates a pathway for repeated returns to executive power unmatched in most neighboring states. A determined political figure could cycle in and out of office across decades. While term limits elsewhere aim to close the door after a fixed number of years, Delaware leaves it slightly ajar. The framework blends restriction with opportunity, offering a constitutional loophole for long-running political influence. 64. During Prohibition, Delaware developed a reputation for relaxed enforcement compared to other northeastern states. Bootlegging operations operated along rivers and coastal routes with relatively limited interference from local authorities, where smugglers exploited waterways to move alcohol, while federal agents struggled to clamp down consistently. The state's geography provided convenient channels for transport and concealment. In an era defined by nationwide bans, Delaware became a place where the dry law felt less absolute. Its shoreline quietly participated in the underground economy that flourished despite official prohibition. 65. Among corporate attorneys, the unofficial phrase, "where America does business," often refers to Delaware, though the state's tourism campaigns rarely use it. Legal professionals worldwide recognize the phrase as shorthand for its dominance in incorporation and governance disputes. The slogan circulates in boardrooms and law firms rather than on beach brochures. It captures how deeply embedded Delaware is in the structure of American commerce. While vacationers think of sand and boardwalks, executives think of statutes and precedents rooted firmly in Dover. 66. In 1992, Delaware passed one of the first modern limited liability company statutes in the United States, providing a flexible hybrid between corporations and partnerships. The LLC structure quickly spread nationwide, becoming a standard choice for small businesses seeking liability protection with simplified taxation. Delaware's early adoption positioned it at the forefront of another legal innovation. Millions of entrepreneurs now rely on a framework that gained momentum from this legislative move. Once again, the state refined business law and watched the rest of the country follow its template. 67. Aubrey Plaza, later known for roles in Parks and Recreation and The White Lotus, was born and raised in Wilmington before becoming a fixture of offbeat Hollywood humor. Her dry delivery and unconventional screen presence contrast with Delaware's understated public image. Growing up in a small mid-Atlantic state did not prevent her from shaping modern television comedy. When audiences quote her sarcastic lines, they rarely associate them with Delaware roots. The first state continues to produce cultural exports that surprise viewers nationwide. 68. The Chesapeake and Delaware Canal was first proposed in 1661, but took more than 160 years to fully complete. Cutting across the state, it created a direct shipping link between the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware River. The canal dramatically reduced travel distance for commercial vessels and remains one of the busiest waterways in the nation. What began as a colonial-era concept evolved into critical infrastructure. Delaware's narrow geography allowed engineers to connect major water systems with a single strategic cut through its center. 69. Bombay Hook. National Wildlife Refuge in Delaware hosts extraordinary concentrations of migratory waterfowl each year. Per square mile, it attracts more species than many comparable refuges along the East Coast. Marshes and tidal flats provide crucial habitat for birds traveling thousands of miles along the Atlantic Flyway. Birdwatchers from across the region gather during peak seasons to witness the spectacle. Tucked inside one of America's smallest states lies a globally significant stopover point for wildlife moving between continents. 70. Delaware banks played a major role in developing the modern variable interest rate credit card after deregulation allowed greater flexibility in setting rates. This financial model spread rapidly across the country and reshaped consumer borrowing habits. Adjustable rates increased profitability for lenders while introducing new complexity for cardholders. A policy shift in a small state helped normalize a product now carried in millions of wallets. Delaware's legal environment did not just attract banks, it influenced how Americans manage debt in everyday life. 71. The famous Mason-Dixon line, long treated as the symbolic divider between North and South in American history, runs directly through Delaware. That boundary once marked cultural, economic, and political fault lines that defined entire eras. Delaware physically sits on that dividing stripe, embodying elements of both regions at different moments in its past. During the Civil War, it remained in the Union despite holding slave states' characteristics. The map literally cuts through the state, reflecting a deeper identity split that mirrors broader national tensions woven into Delaware's complex historical position. After hearing all this, does Delaware still feel like the quiet little state everyone forgets? Or does it sound like the secret mastermind behind America's history, corporations, and chaos? From thunderstorm horseback votes to trillion-dollar paperwork empires, from medieval punishments to meteorite beer, this tiny state somehow keeps rewriting the rulebook in the weirdest ways possible. So here is the real question. Which Delaware fact shocked you the most? And which one sounds completely unbelievable? Drop your answer in the comments right now. If you love uncovering the strangest stories in America, hit like, subscribe, and join Dumbest Things for the next deep dive.